to New York, that was their air conditioning. Just, you know, a sweat
All right, y'all. We're about ready to start here.
I'll do it the long way. That's the only way I know.
Yeah, I don't know.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody, for coming today. And I wanted to have the great pleasure of introducing my longtime friend, Lynn Abegglen, and also her partner, Romy Rivera.
Yes.
And even though they're both from California, we want to give them a warm welcome. And
Literally.
I'm just kidding. So they've been good friends of my partner, John, and mine for probably over 20, 25 years. And Lynn has done all kinds of work in the LGBT community as an advocate, as an activist, and she has a background in social work. She's done diversity trainings for various agencies in Pierce County, and I think you'll really enjoy her a lot. So here she is.
Thank you.
You may have seen this heterosexual questionnaire that has been on the tables. Feel free to take them. It's just it might be like to be in the shoes of those who are asked to answer these kinds of questions about why are they gay? When did they know? When did you figure out you're straight? That sort of thing. So it's an empathy sort of piece. I want to acknowledge Mother's Day and my mom and my wife's mom, who are both here, but I can't see them, and so that's annoying. Romy not only moved up here from California, but she's originally from Nicaragua. So if you have any questions about the history of Latin America, feel free to, she knows it all, she tells me. I wanted to start out by saying when I was growing up, there was little, if any, available information about people who were lesbian, gay, bisexual, and we didn't really even know what being intersex or transgendered were. At the risk of being vulnerable about my age, I was born when the church was, I saw from sitting out here. So that was a while back. So I feel especially grateful for congregations like yours, because you're courageous enough to be willing to explore unfamiliar, uncomfortable, downright scary topics. And I appreciate it, so I wanted to thank you. I want to next try to do a quick review of what we learned last week. And then we'll build on that with new information about gender and sexual orientation. Last time we talked about, was everybody here last time?
Pretty much.
Some of us.
Oh, more or less, okay. His biological sex is how we're born. And historically in Western society, we have understood that as being either a female or a male, based upon the appearance of the infant's genitalia at birth. As soon as the infant is born, those present check for the presence or absence of a penis. And that's pretty much, that's the level of sophistication historically. As we learned last week, it's way more complicated than that. There are multiple complicated biological processes that involve intersecting layers of biochemistry, organic potential, and structure. So everyone's biological sex reflects a combination of their chromosomes, which you can't see when you look at the baby. Chromosomes, internal reproductive structures, external reproductive structures, secondary sex characteristics, internal and intrauterine hormone levels throughout gestation. It's just a whole happy dance going on that whole time. But regardless of each infant's apparent genitalia, they are assigned one perceived biological sex or the other. Female or male, right? In between, there are all these variations that we're understanding better now than we have before because of scientific advances. And that's where intersex comes in. And my lovely assistant, thanks.
Thank you. Sure.
So don't let it scare you too much, unless you want to. I don't mean to be bossy.
Go ahead.
She's an older sister.
So I'm not sure if there are enough. We may have to share, but that's something we're practicing at our house. So for the time being, we're just going to look at that top continuum. And I have this so I can point at it for people who prefer that or can't see, don't have access to one of those. So, biological sex, the physiology, the anatomy of somebody, and the determination that they're male or female, or, where did the, as we learn, or somewhere in between, intersex. Have you heard that term? I mean, it's a lot more common than the olden days, but I still don't know people's exposure.
I haven't heard that term.
Well, now you're all.
And I'm from Glendale.
Yeah. Okay. One last comment about biological sex is that when there's that assignment, that designation of male or female, it carries with it lifelong medical, social, and even legal assignments. When you think about it, it's a big deal. So the baby pops out, eventually, depending, and the baby is given a blanket, and it's one of two colors, historically, right? So what are the qualities or traits that we think of if the baby has a pink blanket?
It's a girl.
Girl. And what are girls?
They're sweet.
Prissy.
Nice and everything nice.
Oh. Okay, that I can take no more of that. And so the baby gets a blue blanket and
they're tough and they don't cry.
dead right. Sex and the gender and biological sex are not the same thing. All this stuff, we've had it collapsed into one continuum, right? All this time. And now we're understanding more of the nuances between different elements. So gender is a cultural thing. It's not a biological thing. And it has to do with what is considered to be masculine and feminine in a given culture group or society. And is really important to let it soak in for a second. Culture has huge implications. So what is considered masculinity and femininity are culturally defined. They're not biologically determined. So can you give me any examples? Can you think of things that in our society we think of as feminine that are considered masculine in other parts of the world, in other communities?
Sarong. Wearing the sarong, it's a type of skirt. And in certain islander, you know, I think like in Guam maybe, or Hawaii, it's very common for guys to wear a sarong.
Right.
But here, no. You don't see
Yeah.
that.
Well, Scotland.
Yes.
Kilts, yeah.
Maybe get away with a kilt here.
Oh, yeah.
But you're pushing those limits.
You're pushing
Yes.
it, you still notice it.
Absolutely. And something that women do here more in their interactions is hold hands. Not as much nowadays, but previously, girls were known to hold hands. Boys never. In other parts of the world, men holding hands is very common, which is an adjustment for our soldiers. You know, when they go to the Middle East, you know, there's all sorts of those cultural qualities that have a big impact, and they're disorienting. You're not sure what to do with them.
Is it true that in the Middle East that men, when they're younger, think it's okay to have sex with the other guys, and it's just practice? That's like a normal thing before they get married. Is that you heard that?
I've heard lots of things. You know, you have to be really specific. It's like Latin America. You know, actually, Romy's going to be able to tell you a lot more about Nicaragua than she is other countries, and regional differences and so on, religious practices, etc. So there are things in some parts of the world, in some cultures, that are acceptable that we might be mortified by or indifferent to. As I said, gender is not biological. It's simply culturally determined expectations with regard to specific actions, behaviors, strengths, weaknesses, personal attributes, preferred activities, even what someone should like or be drawn to or be good at, and it includes who you should fall in love with and to whom you should be attracted. Okay? That's all the cultural rules. And just to complicate things, but only for a second, I'm just going to drop that in some cultures, in some communities, there are more than two genders. Oh yeah. It's really interesting. And it's really hard for those of us who grew up here to make space for, because we see gender as tied to genitals, right? And it's not. Gender roles are societal expectations and assumptions about what a real man or a real woman do, right? What they are, what is truly feminine and masculine. They're kind of the shoulds in a culture, how we're supposed to behave, which I'll refer you back to when I got queasy earlier with all of the volunteer information about sweet and sugar and spice and all that. Gender identity, this is different from that. It's on an individual level, and each one of us has our own gender identity, queer or not. Everybody has their own inner sense of who they are in in terms of being woman, man, or maybe even a blend. Third gender, two-spirit is something, a term that has been used by native populations to try to describe this other way of being that's not at the extreme ends. So. Gender presentation, gender expression can describe people, and it can describe, but that made no sense what I had in my notes. Moving on. I don't know what that was about. Everything we do that communicates in some way about our sex or gender to others. Clothing, hairstyles, mannerisms, even how we speak. It's different how communication happens between people on this end of the spectrum and people on this end of the spectrum. The roles we take in social interactions that are perceived as masculine or feminine, again, are based upon each culture's norms. It's how we interpret that. Gender expression is also a continuum, which is pesky when we grow up in a binary world where it's black and white, either or. No such luck. And you may have heard the term androgynous more in the recent decades, and that refers to this kind of in-between space between masculine and feminine. Transgender, lots of terms, sorry, is kind of a general umbrella term for breaking the rules, crossing the boundaries between things on this side and things on this side. So you can think of it as transgressing. Remember back in the 60s and the hullabaloo about wearing pants to school? We will overcome.
But they had to have the zippers on the sides.
Thank you.
Wow. Or not great pockets, still.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, that's still an issue.
Yes, indeed. Thank you, sisters. So, transgender can refer to behavioral things, picking a non-traditional career path, having talents that girls or boys aren't supposed to have, and transgressing those delineations can refer to people and how they see themselves. So a person whose internal sense of gender does not match the gender identity that society expects of them based on their genitalia is what we're talking about at the more significant or substantial version. So if we were to have, on your handouts you have Ken and Barbie, because they're kind of, if you stop and think about it, the ideal man and ideal woman, right? Yeah. All that and they're white too.
That's problematic. Very scary.
I don't want to talk about weight.
I'm just saying.
So all of these three categories are, we all have them. We all have our own versions of them. They don't always line up like this. So it can be a mix and match. And so for folks whose body appears to be female, their gender identity may be more in this region, in the two-spirit or third gender kind of realm. Or they may really feel like some of you know personally and some of you have heard about, the man trapped inside a woman's body kind of notion. And neither of those things necessarily have anything to do with gender presentation. Is everybody okay?
Yeah.
This is a whole lot. Okay. I might need help because it's me. Thank
Do
you.
you want to turn it off?
Yeah, and then,
I'm good at distraction.
are ya? And
I
this
thought
one?
of an example of this. My husband at the time didn't want my youngest son to listen to music and dance. He didn't want him dancing. Dad.
It's not a manly thing to learn. Mm-hmm.
Well.
Could you just stand like, thank you. Take this one off. And then attach that to the file.
Oh, you guys need another pair of hands?
No, I got it. Thank you.
I'll be Vanna.
Oh,
Here's okay.
group participation.
Oh, no,
That's
you
right.
got a good idea.
Okay.
So these top three that we've been talking, yes, I'm sorry.
Okay, I just wanted to mention a couple things that aren't on the chart, and I think they probably need a home. One is celibacy. There are people who feel called to celibacy, and they fit in different places.
Yes.
And the other thing is, when we're talking about norms, and this fits into some different places here, but there's who gets to be a priest, who gets to stand at the altar, who gets to stand in the place of the divine. And there has been, I mean, part of the issue is, women can't do that because they bleed, and only Christ's blood can be on the altar. We can't get that mixed up. What? Yeah.
Wow, I haven't heard it framed that way, but I
I can
believe
tell
you.
you all kinds of stuff. But the thing that's important is that there's this spiritual aspect of our who we are in terms of sex and gender identity and gender perception. It influences who we are, who we're understood to be with respect to God.
Yes.
Who's made more in God's image?
The first draft or the refined version?
Yes.
I did not.
Everyone
say
makes
that
a
out
rough
loud.
draft.
King James Version.
Okay, I trust oh, don't leave on me now, I'll take it personally. No, you can.
I
I'll
need
let you
to
on.
put my foot up, that's all.
I didn't so offend you.
Oh, no, we're good.
It sounds to me like a lot of the things that you're talking about are in the realm of what's culturally defined.
It is. But it's
And-
also how the person identifies. Because you feel called.
Yes.
So we have a whole bunch of people who feel called, but in their traditions, they're not allowed.
Right. I would like to fix that for you.
Well, it's not a problem for me, but it's a problem for a lot of our sisters.
It is.
And not even always in the context of religion, but also I think in like leadership gender roles in different cultures as well that are not religious. But I've had students who are very great in leadership roles, but because of their culture, their families would never support that. And girls in that case often end up sort of being second to their brothers. And I see that very often in education.
But even in schools, in the past, I mean, you would never think of a man being a
Right.
ever.
Right.
And now, I mean,
Right.
it's, I mean, they're, you know.
Yeah.
They're, you know, we have them, and they're amazing.
Yeah. Yes.
They're totally amazing.
And they're important for the little guys
Yes.
and the little
But
girls
years ago,
to
you
see in
wouldn't
a
have
nurturing role.
ever seen that.
Right.
Well, and what was the accusation or the suspicion or the fear
Oh, yeah, they're,
that they're pedophiles,
Right.
right? That they couldn't possibly be there because they have that same nurturing, loving instinct as the rest of us.
So Lynn, do you remember when you were standing up there and you said, well, I don't wanna be bossy? And I said, you're not bossy, so I say that all the time, and my daughter.
That I'm bossy?
No, yeah, well, I say it to Paula, but I say it to my daughter who's 31, she goes, Mom, you're not bossy. It's
Mhm.
okay to be assertive.
Right.
And so I struggle with that.
Yeah.
And I teach classes, and I mean, I'm in leadership positions,
Mhm.
and I feel bossy often.
It's interesting. It's really interesting when you start diving into this stuff and people's experiences working in committees or in organizations and decision-making processes and
Yeah.
all of that. It's and who speaks and who's heard. You know, which voices are acknowledged, which ones are ignored, maybe
Yeah.
repeated later. It's pretty interesting stuff.
Yeah.
It doesn't always feel good, but at least we're paying better attention now and understanding a little more why that happens. And it's been happening all along.
Yeah.
So again, the top ones here, all have to do with each person's relationship with their own self, their own body, who they are, who they perceive themselves to be, and how they choose to carry themselves around in the world. Make sense? You can tell me if it doesn't. Wouldn't be the first time. All of that stuff has nothing to do with being gay or straight or bisexual. Unrelated. And that gets confusing sometimes for folks. So I want to make sure that you get this. This is your relationship with yourself. This has to do with relationships with others and attractions to others. I often interchange terms like sexual orientation, which is how we often refer to it, with romantic orientation, because I think that it feels different. That if you say sexual orientation, a lot of people just sort of go, right to the genitals and sex organs and sexual practices, as opposed to romantic orientation. And I assume those of you who are heterosexual are not thoroughly obsessed with constant sexual behavior. I could be wrong, and I don't need to know.
Right.
We just have a thing about the S word in our society that focuses in this one area, and romantic orientation or romantic identity is more about connection between people and attraction, and it feels like it's a little more inclusive of the experience that a lot of people have. Is that working?
Yep.
All right. One way to help differentiate between the gender stuff and the sexuality stuff that I've heard is gender is who you are when you go to bed. Who you go to bed as. Sexuality is who you go to bed with. Sexuality is who you go to bed with. gender is who you go to bed as. Your whole self.
There can also be people who are straight, who engage in power over homosexual behavior where their purpose is hurting somebody. That, where there's rape, that happens in prison culture a lot, but it also happens out in the real world. It's a way of exercising power over just like hitting somebody in the face. It's just violating your body.
Yes.
Is violating you in the worst way that a person can do, and so they do.
And it has nothing to do with gay, straight, bi, trans, whatever. It's not.
It's just dominance.
It has to do with power over and control.
And it has nothing to do with either sexual orientation, romantic orientation, and it has nothing to do with any of that.
Right.
It
doesn't have to do with sexuality.
It's about power.
That's right.
Yeah, but people get really
And
confused
degradation
about
and
that,
humiliation and
so
all.
I'm bringing it up. It comes up in the Bible.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Yep.
So I need to say something.
Cool. So sexual identity, orientation, romantic orientation has to do with one's feelings inside of attraction and connection, not a person's activities or behavior, which is straying into what you were saying. A person can feel as though they're gay. Their identity can be that they're gay, but they may be in a heterosexual relationship. That's really tough. Trust me. And it's painful if, in my case, my husband was this wonderful person, and I thought it would be different when we got married. You know, I tried so hard to conform to expectations, and it was one of the most painful things in my life, was having to part ways with this wonderful person who loved me and I loved him, and yet it wasn't gonna be fulfilling for both of us, and we each deserved better. So back to Ken and Barbie, over here. The expectation on this extreme is that a male body is going to identify as a man and be a masculine man at that, and have an attraction towards women. Not necessarily. And similarly over here, somebody with a woman's body, etc., goes down, and they're assumed to have an attraction to men. Does this work for everybody? Okay. So these continuum are these four. Forgot to do this part. Attraction. Okay, this is not going to be pretty. And for those of you
Impressive.
who read English, but can't read that, it's either. So, okay. And the terms that we talk about on this continuum are heterosexual means the other, assuming that there's only two, right? And in between, there can be bisexual identity, sexual identity, not necessarily behavior, or asexual, which I think is where you were heading with the
to celibacy.
That's the word, thank you.
But a lot of people who are celibate actually understand it as something entirely separate.
Is
They
it?
don't understand themselves as asexual.
Okay.
And they understand it as a cult. So,
Mm-hmm.
and in our tradition, a lot of people think that that Luther was opposed to celibacy, but actually he was opposed to forced celibacy.
Ah.
So,
Imposed.
people who weren't called, but whose parents couldn't afford a dowry, so they sent them to the convent. And he said vows taken under those circumstances aren't real, can't be enforced. So the thing is, there are people, and there are Lutherans who are called to celibacy.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
What's asexual?
It's somebody who doesn't have that longing drive inside for sexual behavior, sexual attraction, connections.
So they don't relate with, they're not attracted to either the man or the women? They're just,
In the most
they're just,
basic terms.
Asexual is a huge umbrella.
Take it.
Yeah,
Take
it
it.
is.
Yeah, I've looked into it a little bit. There's demisexual, where you can't be attracted to somebody unless you know them well.
what's that called?
Demisexual or gray sexual. And there's, straight asexual. You're basically straight. You're a guy, you're basically attracted to women, but not that much.
That's what I was thinking.
You can kind of live with that. but it's there. You don't have that strong sense of interest. You don't need it. It's like, relating it to something more common, like most people like football. Okay, it's football season. Everyone's going nuts about football. They talk to me about football, like I don't care.
And I forgive you. Thank you. We need to remember that all of this stuff is a super basic construction, an attempt to make visual and understandable all these concepts and about how we relate to ourselves and our bodies and each other. It's just in the most basic terms, and if it was a lot more detailed, you would all have left by now. And so would I, because it gets too much, it's overwhelming. And when you get more familiar with these things, then you can explore more information and not feel so overwhelmed, because this is already kind of in there. So, let's see. So if you have a female body, that's just for fun, a female body who feels like a man, they're transgender in their identity, right? Are they going to be sexually attracted to men or women, you think?
Maybe.
Depends.
I don't know.
You guys are good. There isn't an association between those things and this. So sometimes people will wonder, well, if somebody is a man and they're attracted to women and they want to live as a female, there's all of these gyrations of why don't they just love but say they're gay, instead of why do they have to change themselves or live in the other gender? Because they want to.
Mm-hmm.
And that's good enough.
There it is, yeah.
And one of the things that I tell people, especially folks who are struggling with their identity, one or the other identity, is don't panic. And whatever label you choose, you can change it anytime you want, every day. So you don't have to decide that you're gay or you're straight or you're bisexual. You can just experience yourself through life, and if you need to put a term on it for the sake of conversation or whatever, you get to do that all by yourself when you feel like it. So you don't have to get locked in. Yes.
The other awkward place around that is the partners of trans people. And what are they called? So.
And yes. Yep.
So I have a colleague, Barbara, a UCC pastor, who is a trans woman who is married to a Lutheran pastor, Susan. And I can't tell you how many times I've heard people say, well, what does that make Susan?
Yep.
It makes Susan married to Barbara.
Is everybody tracking with that? And the complications and confusions around it? And it can be the end of that kind of relationship for some couples, and it can be something that they live and grow through for others.
They got married afterwards.
Just depends.
It's the what are you question that we often try to apply to people of color as well, or people who are mixed, and we want to know more. And just thinking for a second, somebody asking you, what are you? In any sense at all, as a fellow human being, is wrenching. And so I just want us to be aware of that particular question, whether it's related to gender and sexuality questions or BIPOC questions. It's not an okay question.
And my church doesn't know.
BIPOC is Black, Indigenous, or people of color.
I was wondering, though, about pronouns, because we were told to maybe ask someone what their pronoun is, and that's in a way asking them what is their preference.
A way to do that, and it's complicated and it's hard, and be gentle with yourselves as well as the other people. What are you is not probably the best approach.
I know, I'm confused.
But sometimes Romy asks me that. But you can say that. How do you identify? How do you want to? What pronouns do you prefer? How you can let them know that you're trying to be respectful. That's where you're coming from. That it's not out of some kind of I don't really need to know, but I'm curious place.
And you can introduce yourself with your own.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
If you're curious, introduce yourself with your own. Then you're not putting it on them. You're putting it on yourself.
Yeah, we have a wonderful cashier every week that waits on Bev and I at Panera's. Very slight, curly, pink hair, but male. And I don't want to offend him, but
Right.
yet I like that, just gently saying, I'm a she, her, what you
Kind of
prefer.
gal.
Yeah, exactly. So that's good to know. Be gentle. Yeah.
And the same thing with people with disabilities or differently able to, people are curious. Children are curious.
Yeah.
Why is she in a wheelchair? We'll ask her, what's wrong with you? Why can't you walk?
Oh, yes.
And they're just basically curious. And the person, some are very gracious and want to quickly kind of explain it and move on. And others may be offended, others may not want to talk about themselves at all.
And a question you can ask yourself in advance is, why am I wanting to know?
Well, that's true. Yeah.
Do I need to know this? It's uncomfortable for us
Yeah.
to not be able to put people in categories that we're familiar with.
My daughter's always apologizing for me. I'm a smart person, I've always been kind of smart, but I'm so stupid at other times. When it comes to, you know, like sex and drugs and stuff like that and alcohol, I don't know, you know, I'm like totally lost. You know, I mean, English you can learn, math you can learn, algebra you can figure out, calculus maybe not. But, you know, I mean, it's just, it's hard for me to wrap my head, and I always say the wrong thing, that like, I'll use the wrong pronoun, and my daughter is like always, you know, apologizing for me, and it's embarrassing because I don't know what I'm doing wrong, but I don't know, maybe the puppy dog, you know, the things, you know, the boys are puppy dog tails, and, you know, girls are sugar and spice and everything nice.
I had to go back there.
I really didn't have a lot of women around me. I was raised with a brother 4 years older and a brother 4 years younger. So I was either a mom to him or shut up, I'm the boss, you know, little sister to the other one. And then Dr. Eddie had 7 boys, so I was raised around all Dr. Eddie's kids. And the 2 girls were older, so they were off. So I was basically raised with 9 guys. So I think like a guy, but I'm not attracted to women. But I think like them, like more of a linear thing. That's why I can work with engineers more than I can work with, you know, it's
And maybe your brain, maybe that's just your predisposition anyway. It may have nothing to do with who you grew up around, you know? Who knows? I mean, it's fun to me, and it's curious, it's interesting, but I think a lot of what I have learned is to try to be more comfortable with all of the not knowing and not being able to find out and get the clear answers and stuff. It's like,
so if you said something wrong, you say, you know, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to offend you. I just, you know, I'm trying to wrap my head around the way everybody thinks about everything. I'm still learning. You know, the asexual versus, you know, the other one. And you know, it's just kind of still kind of murky for me.
yeah, welcome. It's going to take time and heart and empathy and self-education. Hearing, reading from people who've been through those experiences different from yours, and how it felt and how people perceived and experienced different kinds of things. So, and then you'll get a little more familiarity and more comfort. I want to ask if there's more questions. There's a question that often comes up about, so how do you know? How did you know? When did you know? And all of that. So I have a little group participation exercise. Don't get nervous now. So I'm going to ask everybody to cross your arms. Thank you. Now uncross them and cross them the other way. Weird. Weird. Yeah.
I don't know if I can.
Okay, now with your hands, fold your hands. Pay attention to which thumb's on top kind of thing. And undo them. And then fold them the other way.
Whoops. Oh. There.
Oh. See, it's fun. This is for my entertainment.
The look on our faces.
Does anybody have an idea why I did that?
What comes naturally and what feels wrong, what feels unnatural to you.
And how did you know? Did somebody teach you you had to fold your hands or fold your arms a particular way? Or did you just come to understand that about you? Left-handedness, right-handedness, ambidextrousness, same kind of thing. Sometimes people get forced into one direction or another, and by their environment, but left to their own, what feels natural and normal for them. So I hope that helps. And if it doesn't, it's okay, because I got to watch. I know we're about out of time. Do people have other questions? I believe next time y'all are gonna hear from a panel of
Parents.
queer youth.
Parents of rainbow
Parents
kids.
of.
Parents of rainbow kids.
Okay,
Parents are in.
all right. If there are no questions. Thank you very much. Thanks again.